I stood frozen in the doorway, watching my father lunge across the dining table at my grandfather, a man I'd been told was dead for most of my life. Glass shattered, my mother screamed, and two loan sharks stood in our entryway watching the collapse of 20 years of lies with cold, calculating eyes. That dinner destroyed my family, but it also saved us. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Drop a comment below if you've ever discovered a family secret that changed everything. Let me take you back to where it all began 3 days before that catastrophic dinner. I had just turned 24 that spring, working 2 jobs to help keep our family afloat, while my younger brother Leo finished high school. My father, Michael Thorne, ran what was left of the family construction business, or at least that's what he told us. My mother, Eleanor, had stopped asking questions years ago, her spirit worn down by decades of walking on eggshells around my father's volatile temper. The story I'd grown up with was simple and tragic. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, had been a brilliant but reckless businessman who gambled away the family fortune on bad investments. When my grandmother fell ill with cancer, there was nothing left. Arthur had vanished in shame, abandoning his dying wife and leaving my father to pick up the pieces. My father had rebuilt everything from scratch, or so he claimed, and mentioning Arthur's name in our house was absolutely forbidden. I believed this story completely. Why wouldn't I? It explained everything: why we struggled financially despite my father's supposed business success, why he worked such long hours, why he was so bitter and controlling. He was the hero of his own narrative, the dutiful son who'd salvaged his family's reputation from his father's failures. But 3 days before that dinner, cracks started appearing in that carefully constructed story. It was a Tuesday evening when I came home early from my shift at the coffee shop. I was exhausted, my feet aching mentally, calculating whether I could afford to buy Leo new shoes before school started. As I pushed open the front door, I heard my father's voice booming from his home office, sharp and aggressive in a way that made my stomach clench. I paused in the hallway, not quite eavesdropping, but unable to move forward. The voice I heard wasn't the controlled, martyred tone he used with the family. This was different, desperate, angry, afraid. "I don't care what you have to do, Frank," he was saying, his words tumbling out fast. "I need until the end of the month. The Riverside project is about to close. I'll have the money then." There was a pause, and I could almost feel the tension radiating through the closed door. No, listen to me. I have assets. The house alone is worth $500,000. You know I'm good for it." Another pause. His voice dropped to something darker, more threatening. "Don't you dare threaten me. I've been making payments. This is just a temporary setback." I heard him slam something, probably his fist on the desk. My heart was pounding. What payments? What setback? The construction business was supposed to be doing well. He'd just bought himself a new Lexus 3 months ago. I tiptoed backward toward the kitchen, where I found my mother standing at the sink, hands gripped so tightly on the edge that her knuckles were white. She didn't turn when I entered. "Mom," I whispered. She jumped, then forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Chloe, honey, I didn't hear you come in." "Who's Frank?" The color drained from her face. "Just a business associate. Nothing to worry about." But I was worrying. I'd been worrying for months, actually, about the strange phone calls, the way my father would disappear for hours without explanation, the tension that seemed to grow thicker in our house with each passing week. Before I could press further, my father's office door flew open and he strode out, his face flushed and sweaty despite the air conditioning. When he saw me, something flickered across his expression. Guilt, anger. He smoothed it away, quickly replaced it with his usual stern mask. "Chloe, you're home early." My shift got cut. I lied, not wanting to admit I'd been listening. He nodded curtly, then grabbed his car keys from the hook by the door. "I have to go out, don't wait up." He was gone before either of us could respond, the door slamming behind him, with enough force to rattle the picture frames on the wall. That night I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong, in a way I couldn't quite articulate. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thought about my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. She'd always been the truth-teller in the family, the one who asked uncomfortable questions at holiday dinners until my father would shut her down with a look. The next morning I called her. "Aunt Carol, can I ask you something about Grandpa Arthur?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. "What brought this on, sweetie? I just want to know the truth about what really happened. Dad never talks about it, but something feels off." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear her weighing how much to tell me. "Chloe, the story your father tells about Arthur gambling away everything, that never quite added up to me. Your grandfather was many things, but reckless with money wasn't one of them. He built Vance Construction from nothing into one of the most respected firms in the state. But the debt's the bankruptcy? What bankruptcy, honey? When your grandmother got sick, Arthur sold their vacation home to pay for her care. That house was worth over $1 million. And the business was thriving right up until your father took over. My mind reeled. Took over, I thought Grandpa abandoned it. Is that what Michael told you? She sighed deeply. Arthur stepped down to care for your grandmother full-time. He handed the business to your father, trained him for a year before fully retiring. This was supposed to be a gift, a legacy. But 6 months after your grandmother died, Arthur disappeared. And your father told everyone he'd run off in shame. Why would Dad lie about that? I don't know, sweetheart. But I tried to find Arthur once, maybe 5 years ago. I hired a private investigator. The trail led to a small apartment in Portland, but by the time I got there, he'd moved on. The landlord said he'd paid 6 months up front in cash and left no forwarding address. That doesn't sound like a man drowning in debt, does it? We talked for another hour, and with each revelation, the foundation of my understanding crumbled. Aunt Carol told me about the fights she'd overheard between my father and Arthur before my grandmother's death, about money that went missing from the business accounts, about Arthur's growing concern that Michael was making reckless investments and hiding losses. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I felt like I'd been living in a house made of lies, and someone had just pulled out the supporting beams. That afternoon, everything accelerated. I came home from my morning shift to find the atmosphere in our house electric with tension. My father was on another phone call, his voice ricocheting off the walls of his office. But this time, he wasn't trying to be quiet. Wednesday night, 7 o'clock. Tell him to bring the original portfolio. This isn't a request. I stood in the living room, frozen. My mother emerged from the kitchen, her face ashen. Michael, you can't be serious, she said when he ended the call and stepped out of his office. After 20 years, this is insane. I don't have a choice, Eleanor. His voice was cold flat, the tone he used when he'd already made up his mind and wouldn't tolerate dissent. She left everything to him. He owes us. He owes me. Who? I demanded, stepping forward. Who owes you? My father's eyes snapped to me, and for a moment I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine fear, quickly masked by anger. This doesn't concern you, Chloe. If it's happening in this house, it concerns me. Who's coming to dinner? Your grandfather. The words came from my mother barely above a whisper. She was staring at my father like she didn't recognize him. He's invited Arthur. The room spun, but I thought he was dead. You said he was probably dead. I lied, my father said flatly. I know exactly where he is. I've always known. The casual cruelty of that admission stole my breath. For 20 years, I'd mourned a grandfather I'd never really known, been told he was lost to us, possibly dead in some distant place. And all along my father had known where he was. Why, it was all I could manage. Because he has something that belongs to me. And Wednesday night I'm taking it back. That evening I couldn't eat. I kept thinking about Aunt Carol's words about the story that didn't add up about my father's desperation and lies. Leo, my 15-year-old brother, sensed something was wrong and stuck close to me, his eyes wide and frightened. Chloe, what's happening? He whispered after dinner as we loaded the dishwasher together. Why is everyone acting so weird? Why is Grandpa Arthur coming? I thought he was gone. I don't know, buddy, but I promise I'll figure it out okay. I'll keep us safe. It was a promise I wasn't sure I could keep, but Leo needed to hear it. He was too young to carry the weight of whatever storm was about to break over our family. Wednesday arrived like a death sentence. The whole day felt surreal, as if we were all actors preparing for a performance we hadn't rehearsed. My mother cooked mechanically, her movements precise, but empty. She made pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, all of my grandmother's recipes. I wondered if that was intentional, a silent message to the grandfather I'd never known. My father was a coiled spring, checking his watch every few minutes, pacing between rooms, his phone glued to his hand. Twice I saw him step outside to take calls, his voice low and urgent. Whatever was coming, it was bigger than just a family reunion. At 6:30, I changed into a clean blouse and jeans, my hands trembling as I buttoned up. I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. When had I become so tired? When had the light gone out of my eyes? I was 24 years old, working myself to exhaustion to prop up a family that was crumbling from within, and I didn't even know why. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. I heard my father's footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crossing to the front door. Heard the click of the lock, the creak of hinges, then voices. You called, I came. The voice was deep measured, nothing like I'd imagined. I'd pictured my grandfather as broken weak, perhaps addled by age and poor living conditions. But this voice had steel in it. I stepped out of my room and moved to the top of the stairs where I could see the entryway below. And there he was. Arthur Vance was not the pathetic figure from my father's stories. He stood perhaps 6 feet tall, his posture straight despite what must be his early 70s. He wore an expensive charcoal suit, the kind my father could never afford, and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, his face weathered but strong. His eyes the same bright blue as my mother's had always described my grandmother's. This was not a man who'd been destroyed by shame and poverty. This was not a man who'd run away from his failures. This was a man who looked like he'd been waiting 20 years for this exact moment. My father stepped back and I saw his hand clench at his side. Well, you look well. Better than expected for someone who supposedly lost everything. I did lose everything, Michael. Arthur stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the entryway, the living room beyond. Landing briefly on the family photos clustered on the mantel, photos that conspicuously excluded him. But not in the way you told people. The air in the room changed, became charged with something dangerous. My mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face pale. When she saw Arthur, she gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. "Hello, Eleanor," Arthur said gently. "I'm sorry for intruding on your home this way." "You're not intruding," she managed. "You're family. You've always been family." "That's debatable," my father said sharply. "Shall we eat? I'm sure we all have places we'd rather be." Leo and I came down the stairs together, my brother pressing close to my side. Arthur's eyes found us, and something shifted in his expression, softened. His gaze lingered on me for a long moment. "Chloe," he said softly, "you look just like your grandmother." Tears pricked my eyes unexpectedly. No one had ever told me that before. "Thank you, sir. It's good to finally meet you." "And you must be Leo." Arthur extended his hand to my brother, who shook it hesitantly. "Your grandmother would have loved you both so much." "Touching," my father said acidly. "Can we move this along?" Dinner was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life, and I'd had plenty of uncomfortable family meals. We sat around the table in our assigned places, my father at the head. Arthur at the opposite end like some kind of opposing general. My mother and I on one side, Leo on the other. For the first 10 minutes, no one spoke beyond passing dishes and muttering thank yous. The silence was suffocating. I watched Arthur cut his pot roast with precise economical movements, occasionally glancing up to study each of us in turn. He didn't look uncomfortable. He looked patient, like a chess player waiting for his opponent to make the first move. My father couldn't hold out long. "So," he said finally, his voice dripping with false casualness, "how have you been, Arthur, living it up somewhere? Or did you finally run out of money to waste?" "I've been living quietly," Arthur replied, setting down his fork. "Teaching woodworking at a community center, doing consulting work for small construction firms. Enough to get by." "Right, consulting. Is that what we're calling it?" My father's laugh was harsh. "I thought you'd be begging on street corners by now, considering how thoroughly you destroyed your own company." "I didn't destroy the company, Michael." Arthur's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. "I built it, and I handed it to you in perfect working order." "Perfect." My father slammed his hand on the table, making dishes rattle. Leo flinched. "The business was hemorrhaging money. The accounts were a disaster. I had to spend years cleaning up your mess." Arthur reached down beside his chair and lifted the leather briefcase onto his lap. "That's interesting," he said mildly, "because I brought some documents I thought you might want to see." He opened the case with deliberate slowness, and I found myself leaning forward despite everything. He extracted a thick manila folder, its contents neatly organized behind tab dividers. "This," he said, placing the first document on the table where we could all see it, "is the audited financial statement for Vance Construction as of April 2005, 1 month before I transferred ownership to you. The company had $3 million in assets, $800,000 in liquid capital, and 15 ongoing contracts with a combined value of $12 million. We were growing at 30% year over year." My father's face had gone very still, very white. Arthur laid out another document. "This is the deed transfer showing that I legally and completely transferred all shares of the company to you on May 15, 2005. No strings attached. It was my gift to you, my only son." "Those are forgeries," my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. "They're notarized originals, Michael, with dates, signatures, and witness statements, all verifiable." My mother had stopped eating entirely. She was staring at the documents, then at my father, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. Arthur wasn't finished. He pulled out a series of bank statements, spreading them across the table like a poker player revealing a winning hand. These are from my personal accounts. You'll see here that in June 2005, I sold our lake house, the one your mother and I spent 20 years building together. Sale price $1.2 million. And here you can see where that money went. He pointed to a series of highlighted transactions. Directly to Willow Creek Cancer Center, your mother's medical bills, every cent of it. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But Michael told me the company couldn't afford the treatments anymore. He said the insurance had lapsed because Arthur had let the policies expire. The insurance was fully paid through the end of 2005. Arthur said quietly. I made sure of it before I transferred the company. I would never have left your mother without care. The room was spinning. I looked at my father, this man I'd lived with my entire life, and saw a stranger, a liar, a fraud. You're making this up, my father said, but he was sweating now, his face splotchy with rage and fear. Why should anyone believe you? You disappeared. You abandoned Mom when she was dying. I did disappear, Arthur agreed. But not until after she passed. Not until after I attended her funeral and discovered that you'd told everyone I was too ashamed to show my face. Not until I learned that you'd been spreading lies about my financial ruin for months, setting up a narrative to explain what you were about to do. What are you talking about? Arthur's expression hardened. I'm talking about how you leveraged the company's assets to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford. How you took out loans against properties the company owned. How you made high-risk investments that failed. How you started juggling accounts to hide the losses. By the time I found out what you were doing 6 months after I'd given you control, you'd already run the company into the ground. Lies. I have the forensic accounting to prove it, Michael. I hired investigators. It took me 3 years and most of my remaining savings, but I documented everything. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the embezzlement. You didn't just destroy the company I built. You stole from it. My father lunged to his feet, his chair crashing backward. You don't know what you're talking about. I saved that company. I worked day and night. You worked day and night to cover up what you'd done, Arthur said, standing to face him. Despite being older, he was just as tall, just as strong. And when I confronted you about it, when I threatened to expose what you'd done, you had the leverage of your mother's memory. You told me if I went public, you'd paint me as the villain who destroyed her final years. You'd make sure no one believed anything I said. You'd turn Eleanor and the children against me completely. So I left. I disappeared like you wanted because I couldn't bear the thought of putting your mother's memory through that kind of scandal. But I never forgot, and I never forgave. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel Leo trembling beside me. My mother was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the man she'd been married to for 26 years. Why now? I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Why come back now? Arthur turned to me, and his expression softened. Because of this. He reached into his briefcase again and withdrew a small wooden box carved with intricate patterns. Your grandmother, in the final weeks of her life, knew something was wrong. She was weak, but she wasn't a fool. She saw how Michael was acting, heard his phone calls, noticed his evasions, and she asked me to protect you and Leo. He opened the box, and inside was a sealed envelope and a small brass key. She set up a trust fund separate from anything Michael could touch. It was meant to mature when you turned 25, Chloe, or earlier if circumstances required, and I consented as trustee. It's enough to pay for both your and Leo's education, with plenty left over for you to start your adult lives without debt. My father made a sound like a wounded animal. You're lying. There's no trust. I have the documentation from her lawyer. Michael knew about it. That's why he cut contact with me so completely. He couldn't get to the money as long as I was alive and in control. But he never stopped trying to find a way. Isn't that right, Michael? Before my father could respond, the doorbell rang. For a moment, no one moved. Then it rang again, more insistently, followed by heavy knocking. My mother stood on shaking legs and went to the door. When she opened it, 3 men stepped inside without invitation. The first was middle-aged, wearing an expensive suit that somehow looked threatening on him. Behind him were 2 younger men, both built like linebackers, both with faces that said they'd seen the worst of humanity and become part of it. Sorry to interrupt your family dinner, the first man said, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. But I think we're past the point of social niceties, aren't we, Michael? My father had gone completely white. Frank, this isn't a good time. Really? Because you told me tonight was when you'd have my money. So here I am. And you're going to pay me what you owe plus the 30% interest that's been accumulating since you missed your deadline last month. Frank's eyes swept the room, cataloging everything of value. They landed on Arthur, on the open briefcase, on the papers spread across the table. Well, having a little family reunion, are we? That's touching. But it doesn't change the fact that Michael here owes me $250,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $250,000. That was why my father had been so desperate. That was why he dragged Arthur back into our lives. He thought he could somehow access the trust fund or force Arthur to bail him out. Eleanor swayed on her feet. Michael, what have you done? A man's got to do what a man's got to do to survive, Frank said, conversationally. Michael came to me 6 months ago looking for a bridge loan. Said he had a big development deal about to close, just needed some temporary capital to keep things moving. I should have known better. But he showed me this house, the property deeds talked a good game, so I loaned him the money at a very reasonable rate. Reasonable, Arthur muttered. Hey, it's a free market old-timer. Michael knew the terms. And he knew what would happen if he didn't pay. So. Frank clasped his hands together. Who's got my money? The silence was broken by my father's desperate voice. Dad, please, just give me access to the trust. I'll pay him back, and then I'll never ask you for anything again. Please. Arthur looked at his son with something like pity. You really don't understand, do you? This isn't about money, Michael. This has never been about money. Your mother's dying wish was that her grandchildren be protected. From the world, yes, but also from you. He turned to Frank. How much exactly does he owe you, including all interest and fees? Frank's eyebrows rose. You offering to pay? I'm asking for the exact number. $253,742 as of today. Arthur nodded slowly, then he looked at me. Chloe, the decision is yours. The trust your grandmother left is substantial, enough to cover this debt and still provide for your and Leo's future. But you need to understand what this means. If you bail your father out now, it won't be the last time. Men like him never learn, never stop. My hands were shaking. Every eye in the room was on me. My father desperate and pathetic. My mother broken and lost. Leo terrified and confused. Arthur patient and sorrowful. Frank and his thugs predatory and cold. I thought about my grandmother, who I'd never really known, but who had thought about me even as she lay dying. I thought about all the times I'd worked double shifts, sacrificed my own dreams. Believed my father's stories about struggling to keep us afloat, while he actually struggled to hide his own criminal incompetence. I thought about my mother, who'd spent decades walking on eggshells, making excuses, enabling his lies. And I thought about Leo, who deserved better than to grow up the way I had. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping loudly in the quiet room. I walked over to Frank, who watched me with curious amusement. I'll pay my father's debt, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. On 3 conditions. Chloe, no, my father started, but I held up my hand to silence him, and shockingly he stopped. First, my father signs divorce papers immediately. My mother has had them prepared for months. She was just too afraid to serve them. Not anymore. Eleanor gasped, but I saw hope flicker in her eyes for the first time in years. Second, he signs over his share of this house to my mother. It was bought with money from my grandmother's family anyway. It should have always been hers. Chloe, please, my father begged, but I wasn't finished. Third, he leaves tonight and never contacts any of us again. No calls, no visits, no letters. We are done being his safety net, his victims, his cover story for his failures. He wanted to erase his father from our lives. Now I'm erasing him from ours. Frank let out a low whistle. Damn, that's cold. I like her. I turned to my father, and I barely recognized him now. He looked small, shrunken, all his bluster and authority evaporated. What's it going to be, Dad take the deal, or Frank takes the house and we all lose? The next hour was a blur. Arthur made some phone calls, got an emergency notary to come to the house. My mother pulled out the divorce papers she'd indeed had ready, hidden in the back of her closet, waiting for the courage to use them. My father signed everything in a daze, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. Frank got his money wired directly from the trust account Arthur controlled. He and his men left with handshakes and warnings that we better never need his services again. My father packed a bag, moving through the house like a ghost. He tried to talk to me once, tried to explain, but I turned my back on him. There was nothing left to say. 24 years of lies couldn't be explained away in a moment. When he finally left walking out to his Lexus that he wouldn't be able to afford much longer, no one said goodbye. We watched from the window as his taillights disappeared down the street, and then Eleanor collapsed into Arthur's arms, sobbing like a child. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry I believed him. I'm so sorry I kept you from your grandchildren." "Hush," Arthur said gently, holding her like she was made of glass. "You were a victim too. We all were." That night, Arthur stayed in the guest room. We sat up late, just the four of us, and he told us stories about my grandmother, about the business he'd built, about the life they'd had before my father destroyed it. He told us he'd been living in Seattle, doing small construction consulting jobs, living in a modest apartment, always keeping tabs on us from a distance, but never interfering because he'd believed we were better off without him in the picture. "I was wrong," he said, looking at Leo and me with wet eyes. "I should have fought harder, should have found a way to stay in your lives. I'll regret that until the day I die." "You're here now," I said, and I meant it. That's what matters. The next few months were strange and painful, and also somehow healing. My father tried to contact us exactly twice. Both times, Arthur had a lawyer send cease and desist letters. We heard through the grapevine that he'd moved to Arizona, was working as a sales manager at a hardware store, living in a studio apartment. His fancy car got repossessed. The life he'd built on lies and embezzlement had collapsed completely. I didn't feel sorry for him. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. Eleanor filed for bankruptcy on my father's business debts and emerged free of them since they'd been in his name only. She started seeing a therapist working through decades of emotional abuse and manipulation. She laughed more. She took up painting. She let her hair grow long instead of keeping it in the tight bun my father had preferred. Leo thrived with Arthur around. My grandfather taught him woodworking, took him fishing, helped him with his homework, showed him what it looked like when a man treated his family with respect and honesty. The fear that had lived in my brother's eyes began to fade. As for me, I used part of the trust money to pay off my credit cards and quit one of my jobs. I enrolled in community college, finally pursuing the degree in social work I'd always dreamed about. And Arthur helped me understand the full scope of what my grandmother had left us. It was enough if we were careful to secure all our futures. We sold the big house that held too many bad memories and bought a smaller, warmer place near a lake. Arthur moved in with us officially. We became the family we should have been all along. One morning, about 6 months after that terrible dinner, I woke up to the smell of pancakes. I came downstairs to find Arthur at the stove, Leo setting the table, and Eleanor humming as she arranged flowers she'd cut from our new garden. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making everything glow golden. Arthur saw me and smiled. "Good morning, sweetheart. Sleep well." "Better than I have in years," I said truthfully. As we sat down to breakfast, Leo chattering about his upcoming science fair project, Eleanor discussing her plans to take an art class at the community center, I realized something profound. That nightmare dinner hadn't destroyed our family. It had destroyed the fiction we'd been living in, the house of cards built on my father's lies and our collective willingness to pretend everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. It had hurt. God, it had hurt. But pain is sometimes the price of truth. And truth, I was learning, is the only foundation strong enough to build a real life on. My grandmother's legacy wasn't the money, though I was grateful for it. Her legacy was the freedom to finally be honest, to finally choose ourselves, to finally understand that love without respect is just another word for captivity. Later that week, I got my acceptance letter to the State University social work program. Full ride scholarship based on my essays in community service. I read the letter sitting in our new garden where Arthur had helped me plant tomatoes and herbs, and I cried happy tears. Eleanor found me there. "You okay, honey?" "More than okay, Mom. For the first time in my life, I feel like I can actually breathe." She sat beside me on the bench Arthur had built, putting her arm around my shoulders. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you, taking control the way you did that night, making the hard choice. I should have been that strong years ago." "You were surviving the best way you knew how," I said. "We all were. But we're not just surviving anymore. We're living." That evening, as the sun set over the lake, and Arthur taught Leo how to cast a fishing line, while Eleanor sketched them both, I thought about the girl I'd been 6 months ago. Exhausted, defeated, trapped in a cycle of enabling and sacrifice that was slowly killing her spirit. I thought about my father wherever he was, hopefully learning the same lessons we'd learned, but probably not. Some people never change. Some people never want to. But we had changed. We'd chosen truth over comfort, freedom over false peace ourselves, over the demands of someone who saw us only as tools for his own survival. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Carol. She'd become a regular presence in our lives again, another relationship my father's lies had nearly destroyed. The message was simple: proud of you, kiddo. Your grandmother is smiling down. I smiled and typed back, we're going to be okay. Better than okay. And we were. We really truly were. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to make a choice like this? Cut off someone toxic, even though it meant pain. Stand up for yourself, when everyone expected you to just keep enabling. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped by someone else's lies or manipulation, please hit that like button and subscribe. Sometimes we all need to know we're not alone in these struggles. Sometimes we need permission to choose ourselves. I'm giving you that permission right now. Your loyalty belongs to people who earn it through respect and honesty, not to people who demand it through manipulation and fear. Your love should flow to those who cherish it, not to those who exploit it. And your life, your beautiful, precious life, belongs to you and you alone. Don't wait 20 years to learn that lesson. Don't let someone else's brokenness become your prison. That dinner might have been the worst night of my life while it was happening. But looking back now, I see it as the night I was finally born into the life I was meant to live. The weight I'd been carrying for 24 years, the burden of being the good daughter who held everything together, who sacrificed her dreams to prop up a lie. It all fell away that night. And yes, it left me raw and exposed for a while. Yes, there were nights when I questioned my decision, when guilt tried to creep back in, when that old voice in my head whispered that maybe I'd been too harsh, too cruel, too selfish. But then I'd look at Leo laughing, with Arthur no longer flinching at raised voices, because there were no more raised voices. I'd see my mother painting at her easel by the window, her face relaxed and peaceful in a way I'd never seen before. I'd wake up without that knot of dread in my stomach, that constant low-level anxiety about what crisis would explode next. And I knew I'd made the right choice. The only choice really if I wanted any of us to survive with our souls intact. There's a story Arthur told me a few months after that dinner when we were working together in the garden. He was teaching me how to prune rose bushes, explaining that sometimes you have to cut away the dead wood, even healthy-looking branches, to let the plant thrive. Your grandmother used to say that some relationships are like diseased branches. He said, his weathered hands gentle on the pruning shears. They look sturdy, they've been part of the structure for so long that you can't imagine the plant without them. But they're slowly poisoning the whole system. And if you don't cut them away, they'll eventually kill everything. Is that what Dad was? I asked. A diseased branch. Arthur was quiet for a long moment, carefully trimming away dead growth. Your father is sick in ways that have nothing to do with medicine. He's sick with entitlement, with narcissism, with a fundamental inability to see other people as anything but props in his own story. I failed him somehow, him and his mother both. We gave him too much, or not enough, or the wrong things. I'll spend the rest of my life wondering where we went wrong. It's not your fault, Grandpa. Maybe not entirely, but I'm his father. I raised him. And somehow I raised a man who could lie to his own family for 20 years, who could steal from the business his parents built, who could manipulate his wife and children without a shred of remorse. He set down the shears and looked at me. But you know what he also gave me, you and Leo, and Eleanor, who deserved so much better, but who, I'm grateful, has another chance at happiness. So maybe some good came from it all. I thought about that often in the months that followed. About cycles and patterns, about how trauma and dysfunction pass from generation to generation, until someone finally has the courage to say enough. I thought about all the ways I might have become like my father or married someone like him if I hadn't seen the truth that night. How I might have spent my life enabling and excusing and sacrificing until there was nothing left of me. That's the thing about toxic family dynamics. They're so insidious, so normalized, that you don't even realize you're drowning until someone throws you a lifeline. Arthur was our lifeline. My grandmother, even in death, was our lifeline. And that trust fund, as much as the money helped the real gift, was the message behind it: you matter. Your future matters. You deserve to be protected, even from your own family. 1 year after that dinner, I was sitting in my first day of classes at the university, surrounded by other students who'd taken the traditional path straight from high school. At 25, I felt ancient compared to them, but I also felt something they didn't, something that gave me strength. I had earned this. Every page I'd read, every essay I'd write, every client I'd eventually help, it would all mean more because I knew the cost of not standing up for yourself. My phone buzzed during the break. A message from Eleanor. Made a sale today. Someone bought 3 of my paintings from the gallery. I'm taking us all out to celebrate. Your grandmother would be so proud. I smiled, typing back quickly. Another message came through, this time from Leo. Got an A on my history project about family legacies. Mr. Patterson said I should enter it in the district competition. Grandpa helped me research. These were the moments that mattered. Not the big dramatic confrontation, though, that had been necessary, but these small, quiet victories. My mother discovering she had talent and worth beyond being someone's wife. My brother learning what a healthy male role model looked like. Me finally pursuing my own dreams instead of sacrificing them on the altar of someone else's ego. That night at dinner, Arthur raised his glass of iced tea. A toast, he said, to your mother, the artist, to Leo, the historian, and to Chloe, the scholar. You 3 are the best thing to ever come from my son, and I thank God every day that you survived him. We clinked glasses, and I felt it again, that sense of rightness, of being exactly where I was supposed to be. Later, as I was helping Arthur clean up, he said quietly, your father called me today. My hands stilled in the soapy water. What did he want? To know if there was any possibility of reconciliation. He's apparently in some kind of therapy program, part of his recovery from what he called his breakdown. He wanted me to intercede with you all. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, that reconciliation isn't something I can give him, that he burned those bridges himself, and if he wants to rebuild them, he needs to do the work. Years of work. Genuine change, not just words. And even then, you all would be under no obligation to forgive him or let him back into your lives. Do you think he can change? Arthur sighed, scrubbing at a stubborn pot. I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. He's still my son, and I don't want him to spend the rest of his life as miserable as he's made himself. But that's his journey to walk, not ours. I nodded, feeling the wisdom in that. My father's redemption, if it ever came, was not my responsibility. I did not owe him my forgiveness, my time, my emotional energy. I'd already given him 24 years. That was more than enough. As the anniversary of that dinner approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. I'd made the dean's list my first semester. Eleanor had her first solo art show at a local gallery. Leo had been accepted into a gifted program at school. Arthur had reconnected with old friends from his construction days and was consulting on a historic preservation project downtown. We'd all blossomed in ways that would have been impossible in the toxic environment my father had created. But it hadn't been easy. There had been hard days, moments of doubt, times when the guilt crept back in. Society tells us to forgive, to reconcile, to give people second and third and infinite chances, especially when it's family. But sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to stop enabling destruction. I wrote my final paper for my Psychology of Family Systems class about toxic family dynamics and the importance of boundaries. My professor gave me an A and asked if I'd consider submitting it for publication in an undergraduate journal. This is powerful work, she wrote in her feedback. It's clear you're not just studying this academically, you've lived it. She was right. Every word of that paper was soaked in experience and pain I'd transformed into understanding and scars I'd turned into wisdom. That's what survivors do. We take the worst things that happen to us, and we find a way to make them mean something, to use them to help others, to ensure that our suffering wasn't pointless. On the exact 1-year anniversary of that dinner, we didn't acknowledge it explicitly. But that evening, Arthur made pot roast again, using my grandmother's recipe. We sat around our new dining table in our new home, and the contrast couldn't have been starker. 1 year ago, that dinner table had been a battlefield. Tonight, it was a sanctuary. I have something for you, Arthur said after we'd finished eating. He pulled out 3 small boxes, handing one to Eleanor, one to me, and one to Leo. These were your grandmother's. I've been waiting for the right time. Inside my box was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a tiny book with a genuine ruby chip for a clasp. She loved to read, Arthur said softly. She used to say that books were portals to other lives, other possibilities. She'd want you to have this as you pursue your education. Eleanor's box contained a pair of pearl earrings, simple but elegant. She wore these on our wedding day, Arthur said, and on every anniversary after. They represent commitment, but commitment freely given, joyfully maintained, not obligation or duty. Leo's box had a silver compass, vintage and beautiful. This belonged to her father, your great-grandfather. He was a surveyor, spent his life helping people find their way. She'd want you to have it to remind you that it's okay to explore, to chart your own course. We all cried then, even Leo, who at 16 thought he was too old for tears. We cried for the woman we'd barely known, but who had loved us enough to protect us even from beyond the grave. We cried for the years we'd lost with Arthur. We cried with relief that we'd found our way to each other after all. But mostly we cried with gratitude, because that terrible dinner, as painful as it had been, had set us free. Now, as I sit here writing this, it's been 3 years since that night. I'm 27 years old, about to graduate with my master's degree in social work. I specialize in family trauma and toxic relationship recovery. I help other people escape the same traps I fell into, help them see that their loyalty and love are precious things that should be given to those who honor them, not exploit them. Eleanor is a full-time artist now with a small studio downtown and a growing reputation. She's dating someone, a kind man who teaches yoga and treats her like she's made of something precious. She glows in a way I've never seen before. Leo is thriving in high school, captain of the debate team, already receiving recruitment letters from colleges. He wants to be a lawyer, he says, so he can help people stand up for themselves. Arthur attends every one of his competitions, cheering louder than anyone else in the audience. As for Arthur, he's 73 now, slowing down a bit but still vital, still present, still the axis around which our family orbits. He tells me often that these past 3 years have been the happiest of his life since my grandmother died. "I thought I'd lost you all forever," he said recently. "I thought Michael had won. But you took back the narrative, sweetheart. You wrote a different ending." We haven't heard from my father in over a year. The last contact was a letter he sent to Arthur. No return address, just a few paragraphs, apologizing and explaining that he was trying to build a new life. There was no request for contact, no expectation of forgiveness, just an acknowledgement of what he'd done and destroyed. Arthur showed me the letter but didn't press me to respond. "That's his amends to himself," he said. "You don't owe him anything." I think about my father sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep. I don't hate him anymore. Hate requires too much energy, too much continued connection. Mostly I feel sad for him for the life he could have had if he hadn't been so consumed by ego and entitlement. And I feel grateful that I recognized the pattern before I repeated it. Because that's the real danger with toxic family dynamics. Not just that they hurt you, but that they program you to hurt others or to accept hurt as normal. Breaking that cycle takes courage and support, and often outside intervention. In our case, that intervention came in the form of a grandfather who loved us enough to document his son's crimes and bide his time for 20 years until he could help us escape. Not everyone has an Arthur. Not everyone has a grandmother who sets up a trust fund and leaves detailed instructions. But everyone has the right to choose themselves, to set boundaries, to say no to relationships that are slowly killing them, even if those relationships are with family. Especially if those relationships are with family. So I'll ask you again, because I really want to know. Have you ever had to make this choice? Have you ever had to cut off someone toxic? Set a boundary that others said was too harsh. Choose your own well-being over someone else's demands. How did it turn out? Are you still struggling with the decision, or have you found peace on the other side? Drop your stories in the comments. Let's build a community of people who refuse to be victims, who took back their power, who learned that self-love isn't selfish, it's survival. And if you're still in that toxic situation, still trying to fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed, still sacrificing yourself on the altar of family obligation, please hear me. It's okay to leave. It's okay to protect yourself. It's okay to stop setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You deserve better. You deserve peace. You deserve a family that treats you with respect, whether that's your blood family reformed or a chosen family you build from people who actually value you. That dinner 3 years ago was supposed to be my father's last gambit, his final attempt to manipulate and control. Instead, it became our liberation. The night a house of cards fell down, and we finally got to build something real on solid ground. If you found hope or strength in the story, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not crazy for wanting to escape, that they're not cruel for setting boundaries, that they deserve better than what they've been accepting. And remember, the truth will set you free. But first, it's going to hurt like hell. That's okay. Pain is temporary. Freedom is forever. Choose freedom. Choose yourself. Choose life. I did, and I've never looked back. What choice will you make?